Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, and today we get to do the sixth video of the book series The Pearl Beyond Price by A.H. Almaas. There is a playlist available in the channel if you want to watch the previous 5 videos. Since I haven't done one of these in a couple of weeks, what we have done so far is define how the ego comes about through the use of the psychological object relations theory. I have also explained how Almaas is one of those very few authors that has done a brilliant job at actually bridging the psychological development of a human being and how it creates a continuum towards the spiritual development of a human being. And today's video is actually quite crucial for that particular angle. We also talked about how our surrender to vulnerability is like the ego's kryptonite. It is that which the ego cannot stand. When we allow ourselves to feel fully vulnerable, then we can touch parts of ourselves with our awareness, and that creates a transformation that over time erodes egoic structures until eventually, ideally, there will be nothing left. Now, it's interesting that I'm making this video today because 1 or 2 videos ago I was talking about this apparently irreconcilable choice between freedom and safety. And we were talking about how we are always pinging between those two and trying to make compromises between both of them because they don't seem to be on offer at the same time. I may or may not have said it so directly, but the thing that gets in between them, the wedge that separates these two, is the egoic sense of self, the sense of being a separate individual self. And we're going to explore today how this wedge that separates freedom and safety at its core has one object relation, one notion in the mind that is very, very deep and very difficult to deal with. So I'll mention that straight up. The object relation that sits at one of the innermost parts of the egoic sense of identity is that of the mother. And the reason is very simple. As far as object relations is concerned, the earlier we form an imprint in our mind, the deeper it sits in our neurology and the closer it comes to our core sense of identity. Now, as I said before, mother is the very first other. So there is a very good chance that mother is the very first snapshot, or one of the very first snapshots that our mind creates when it's trying to make snapshots of the world so that it can create this entire web of mind that it can use to navigate reality. And therefore, the object relation of the mother sits at the very core of our sense of egoic identity. This is interesting because psychology never tries to do without object relations as a way for our mind to operate. Psychology will tell you that as far as we can go is to create a healthy ego that has object relations that match correctly to reality. And this is where guys like Sam Vaknin get it terribly wrong. He can't see beyond a mind operating surrounded by object relations and believing them to be real. And where spirituality kicks in is it says, no, object relations as a way for the mind to operate can be done without eventually. But it takes an enormous amount of courage and work to get there. And certain object relations are easier than others to dissolve. But the object relation of the mother is the mother of all object relations, quite literally, right? You can't get rid of that one willy-nilly. In Almaas's book, he says that it takes tremendous amount of very dedicated, specialized type of work to touch that object relation, which the ego will not let go of because It's its very sense of self that feels threatened. This is interesting because the ego feels itself to be independent and free of mother. And this is because the first stage, what psychology considers to be separation and individuation, might have gone very well for a healthy ego. A person could be fully physically, mentally, and emotionally independent from mother. And yet, their sense of identity still is completely entangled with the object relation of the mother. So when as youngsters we separate and individuate, we do so by taking larger and larger physical distance from mother and then returning to her until we claim our full physical independence. And then we claim our mental, emotional independence. And that process can run well, as I said. When you have a mother that is a good caretaker, gives you love and the rest of it, you separate and you individuate properly and you become a healthy ego. But the point that Almas is trying to make is the ego is never really actually healthy, because that supposed sense of identity of that is free, that goes through the world doing whatever it wants, is seeing the world through a veil of object relations, of which the object relation of the mother is still a fundamental part. So the separation and individuation that we're talking about here on the spiritual level is one that does away with the object relation of the mother, or at least is able to see completely through it, as opposed to feeling that it's an integral part of it. And by the time you've done that, you all but dismantled the egoic structure. There's probably very, very little left of it by the end of it all. Now, one interesting question that could arise is to say, well, hang on a second. How is it that if I get rid of the notion or the sense of motherly presence in my mind, somewhere in the deep recesses, will I ever feel safe again, right? And how is it that without an ego I can feel free, right? So there's this whole notion that freedom and safety are not really provided by the process that I just described, that you get even further away from them potentially, right? Like it just doesn't quite compute. What you need to remember is that, first of all, freedom and safety are egoic notions to begin with. For that separation to even be there, for the notion of being free or safe, there first needs to be a wedge of an ego to even come up with those in the first place and start making separations and chopping the world up into pieces that are not really there. Secondly, try to see it more from the place of a singularity. When the ego disappears, all the parts of the real self reintegrate back together and you become essentially a singularity. A singularity can only but be itself. And since there are no others in that singularity, you can't really feel afraid of anything, because there are no things. It's all just you looking at yourself all the time. And therefore, safety is kind of a given. The idea of freedom is a little bit trickier, because the ego insists that freedom is kind of doing whatever you want. But if there's no you there to do anything, then the notion becomes just not operative anymore. And this is something that I mentioned earlier in my second to last video about the idea of free will simply not being an operable idea. For individual free will to exist, there needs to be an individual there first. And once you become a singularity, there is no individual. So there you have it. It's just not an operative question. Now, this is quite the crucial video, as I said, for the distinction between how far does psychology go and where does spirituality begin. And it is this notion that psychology has only ever gone as far, for the most part, unless you go into more the fringes, of saying that our task is to become healthy egos and have healthy object relations in our mind. And spirituality goes, no, there is never a healthy ego, not through and through, not really, because at its core the ego is a defensive mechanism that has never really separated and individuated other than on a physical, mental and emotional level. and those are still not the real self. The real self is something else. It's pure being, which cannot be felt so long as these veils are still there, and especially cannot be felt if you believe that you have separated and individuated, as psychology would have you believe if you are a healthy ego. I once made a video saying that a healthy ego is still a diseased individual, or rather a diseased being, rather. So yeah, that's the essence of today's video. That's the 6th video on the Pearl Beyond Price. I am really curious to hear about your comments on this one. And as usual, if you think that these videos are informative and might be helpful to others, then your liking, sharing, and subscribing are always helpful to the channel to make it more visible and very motivating to me. I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Thanks for listening. Cheerio. Bye-bye.